Hi, my name is Lance Pollia. This is the second of a series of interviews with leaders in the environmental movement who are dedicated to reducing global climate change. Today it's my pleasure to introduce Loren Blackford, the president of Sierra Club, and Michael Brune, its executive director. Sierra Club, as you may know, is the largest environmental grassroots organization in the world with over 3 million members and supporters. One of the Sierra Club's stated mandates is to replace coal, oil, and natural gas with non-carbon alternatives. A quick prelude. When I approached Mrs. Blackford for this interview, I was about to explain the purposes and goals of the Mankind Project, but she already knew about the Mankind Project because her stepfather is already a member. I'll start with the first of 7 questions for either or both of you. First one is, what are the highest climate change priorities and initiatives and programs of the Sierra Club, and why were they chosen?
All right, Loren, why don't I take this one? Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Brune, Executive Director for the Sierra Club, as you heard. Lance, thanks for hosting the call, and thanks to all of you for not only inviting us on the call, but for the work that you do as elders, in particular on climate change. We need as much help as we can get. So the top priority for the Sierra Club is to work on climate change and get off fossil fuels and move to 100% clean energy. There are 3 issues that I would highlight. The first one is our Beyond Coal campaign, which is working to replace every coal plant in the country with 100% clean renewable energy by 2030, but also to get off of natural gas and eventually nuclear power as well. We know that clean energy is increasingly more affordable than dirty fuels, and we know that it's increasingly more accessible than dirty fuels. And we also know that when we transition to clean energy, we create more jobs, we cut a variety of forms of air and water pollution, and we help local communities to become more resilient and self-reliant. So that's our top priority, focusing particularly on the electric sector, where we see change happening really quickly and pretty dramatically. A second priority of ours is what we call our Wild America campaign, which is in many ways a classic Sierra Club campaign, work that we've been doing for more than a century to help protect some of the most important ecological and cultural sites in the country. A lot of that work right now is a fierce defensive effort to resist what the Trump administration is looking to do, which is to convert our public lands into resources to be exploited, particularly by the fossil fuel industry. As you may know, the Trump administration is looking to potentially redraw or revoke protection for 27 national monuments across the country, and will be coming out very soon with their plan in that regard. Our third priority is much more affirmative, much more positive, much more aspirational, which is what we call our Ready for 100 campaign, which is focused on getting cities, but also companies, universities, to move to 100% clean renewable energy. So far, we've had about 36 cities make a firm commitment transitioning their cities to 100% clean energy. There have been several dozen companies that have made similar commitments. And we're doing this to show that when we succeed, when companies actually forego building gas pipelines or export terminals or power plants in favor of investing in clean energy, that the economic and social benefits are enormous, as well as, of course, the environmental benefits. We want to show that transitioning to clean energy is something that we can look to with excitement and anticipation, not simply because we have a very clear moral obligation to act on climate change. So we do a lot of work at the Sierra Club. We work on trade issues. We have a broad set of campaigns on air and water and wildlife as well. We have a big international program. But those are the 3 things that I would highlight to start our conversation.
Loren, do you want to add to that?
Nope, I think that covers it pretty well.
Okay. Next question is from Judd.
Yeah, hello, I'm Judd Lawrie, and have a question for you about the new book out, Climate of Hope by Michael Bloomberg and Carl Pope, who I'm sure you know. They suggest that natural gas has a role to play as a transition fuel on the path to renewables. However, many activists are very critical of this. For example, Bill McKibben has suggested that at minimum, we should allow no new fossil fuel extraction infrastructure. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, hi, I think I'll take this one. Loren Blackford, the president of the Sierra Club. And so it's a wonderful book, like the focus on hope. And of course, we deeply appreciate Mayor Bloomberg and Carl Pope's work. We appreciate Mayor Bloomberg's support of our organization, but of course, friends don't agree on everything. So say very strongly that the science is clear. From extraction to production to consumption, fracked methane gas is a dirty fuel that produces significant amounts of pollution. In fact, when methane pollution is accounted for from the wellhead to the power plant, gas contributes more climate disrupting pollution than coal. In addition, gas pipelines and power plants carry a 40-year plus lifespan. 40 years is not a bridge. It's a commitment to prolonging our dependence on fossil fuels. Methane, the primary component of gas, leaks along the entire gas supply chain. And the introduction of methane safeguards, while helpful, will not protect our clean air or our climate from the threat that gas poses. So simply put, the portrayal of gas as a bridge fuel is just the fossil fuel industry trying once again to sell us a bill of goods. Gas is merely a bridge to a future filled with climate disruption, water contamination, and earthquakes. So over a 20-year time horizon, methane is 87 times more potent than carbon dioxide at trapping heat, and studies have shown that it can as much as double the climate impacts historically attributed to the burning of gas. In 2016, the CO2 emissions from gas surpassed those from coal for the first time ever. So to meet the increased demand and build export markets abroad, a network of pipelines is being proposed and constructed across the country. In the Appalachian Basin alone, 19 new and expanded pipeline systems have been proposed, and 40,000 miles of pipelines are proposed out of the Marcellus Shale alone. These pipelines cross public lands, parks, private property, all while threatening these areas with pollution and potential leaks and explosions. The threat of gas pollution is only compounded by the fact that the Trump administration has sought repeatedly to scrap both the EPA and the Bureau of Land Management methane standards, leaving our communities even more vulnerable. So the only solution, we believe, is to transition to 100% clean, renewable energy like wind and solar and keep all dirty fuels in the ground.
Okay, the next question is for Stu.
Hi, thank you for joining us. My name is Stu Kennedy, and I'm calling in from Wellfleet on Cape Cod. Loren just mentioned wind and solar, which we all know show much promise. What are some of the other promising renewable energy sources? And how do you feel about the promise of wind and solar, and how soon it will replace coal and natural gas?
I'll go for this one. So we do feel a great deal of excitement about wind and solar because it is both forms of energy are replacing coal and gas and nuclear power right now in many states across the country, both because solar and wind are real climate solutions, but also because they're cheaper. We're seeing coal plants come down, particularly in the Great Plains states, the region from the Dakotas down south through Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, Oklahoma, down into Texas. Enormous amounts of wind is being installed in those states, which is helping to retire old and dirty coal plants, replace those plants with clean energy, and save customers money. Mid-American, just one example, Mid-American in Iowa will soon be at 80% of their power across the whole state coming from wind at a time when the rates for those customers are staying stable or even declining in some ways. So that's exciting for wind. And solar, we're seeing the prices have dropped so quickly, so dramatically, that not only is solar undercutting coal, but it's also beginning to undercut natural gas. So power plants that are being, new gas plants that are being proposed, particularly in the Southwest, but not just the Southwest, are being rejected because solar is cheaper. The two things that we think contribute to unprecedented optimism when it comes to clean energy are, in addition to solar and wind, are energy efficiency, which has always been the cheapest form of energy. Obviously, it's not you don't create energy by saving energy, but by embracing energy efficiency and conservation, we have an opportunity to meet the growing demands from the economy to create jobs again and save customers money while also reducing the demand for energy across the country. California has been a longtime leader in energy efficiency. States like Idaho, Connecticut have been longtime leaders in energy efficiency. So we see continued investments in efficiency and getting more power out of the same amount of power as a tremendous source of investment. And then the final thing I'll talk about is energy storage, using batteries to help to balance out solar and wind and efficiency represents an enormous opportunity to accelerate the rate at which we're getting off of fossil fuels and transitioning to 100% clean renewables. We're just seeing tremendous advancements both in the technology and then the soft costs associated with solar and wind and battery storage, where they're being deployed more quickly, they're being deployed more efficiently, and they're being integrated more effectively. All of these things combined give us a lot of optimism, both for continued deployment to replace fossil fuels in the electric sector, but also beginning to get off the internal combustion engine and invest more in electric vehicles. And the final thing I'll say is that the integration of the clean energy transition for the electric sector and the transportation sector offers a lot of hope for cutting emissions pretty quickly in the next several years.
Michael, here in Vermont, Vermont Natural Gas just installed pipelines, and their logic was that as a transition fuel, it's still cheaper than solar and more accessible. And I heard you just say just the opposite. That's not correct information.
What's not correct information?
That it's, didn't you just say that that the cost of solar now is less than the cost of natural gas?
What I said is that it's less than the cost of natural gas in many states across the country. It's not true that solar is cheaper than gas in every state in the country or every country around the world. It is true that the cost of solar is dropping dramatically, and so with each quarter, we're finding more and more places where solar is cheaper than gas. And if you look at the trends, it's true that solar will be soon cheaper than natural gas just about everywhere. What we find is that there are lots of utilities, not just in Vermont, who will say that natural gas is a better economic bet, in part because they can make more money off of natural gas than they can on solar. We oppose the construction, we oppose the pipeline in Vermont, we oppose the construction of new natural gas pipelines, natural gas export terminals, or lots of fossil fuel infrastructure, in part because of the impact on climate, but also because if you look 2, 3, 10, 20 years out into the future, renewables are a much better bet economically than fossil fuels. So we don't think that the adding structure for Vermont viewed solely on economic grounds was the right decision.
You speaking for the Sierra Club, would you prefer to see a California-like cap and trade system or a carbon tax system be enacted? I know both are being explored by various municipalities, various states, at either the federal or the state level. And also I'd like to ask, what are your thoughts about divestment as an option?
Well, so I'll take that. I guess first thing I would say is that these are, of course, are complementary. There's a lot of different ways in which we can and must make progress on climate change, ranging from accelerating the development of clean energy, putting a price on carbon or a price on pollution generally, engaging in investment and divestment. We are supportive of divestment. Sierra Club, particularly on college campuses, has been a big part of the divestment movement. We think that that makes good economic sense because we don't see the fossil fuel industry as being a wise economic investment, particularly over the coming years and decades. And certainly we think there's a moral imperative for holders of large amounts of assets to shift those assets towards climate solutions rather than contributing to the problem. So we're firmly supportive of the divestment movement. We're a part of it, and we think that the recent work to both divest and invest is really important. Regarding cap and trade versus carbon taxes or the different fees that are being proposed, generally speaking, the Sierra Club doesn't support cap and trade, in part because we feel that it often results in low-income communities of color being bearing the burden of additional pollution and not having their immediate health risks from air and water pollution be addressed. The cap and trade system in California has had some successes and has had some positive benefits, clearly, but it also has not provided much relief or alleviation for low-income communities that are facing every day really poor air and water quality issues. So we would prefer putting a price on carbon. We think that a carbon tax, if it's well designed, is a much better mechanism to achieve faster results in a more equitable way, both for communities and for our climate globally. So that's what we think. That's what we think is a better set of solutions, but the details actually matter for however a price on carbon is actually applied.
Thank you very much. It's helpful to know that in our arguing with our states.
Sure. Thanks, Stuart.
Yeah, this is Robert Ryan here in Newton, Mass. And just a couple of nights ago, as a connection, I was doing a fundraiser for our local city councilor, Emily Norton, who's your president of the Sierra Club in Massachusetts. And just as a little plug for Emily, she's an awesome colleague, as you might imagine, around climate change and green issues, and she's a terrific city councilor. So my question has to do with how we, particularly in a place like Newton, a place like Massachusetts that has a lot of progressive liberal political leanings, how we try to take the politics as we talk to our moderate and particularly more right-leaning conservative friends. But climate change shouldn't be a partisan issue. Climate change is an issue that affects all human beings, no matter what their political stripes. It affects their kids and their grandchildren. And yet, the fossil fuel industry financing a lot of the disinformation of the last 20 plus years has helped shape it towards a partisan issue. Has helped try to persuade people that it's either the economy or it's the environment, as opposed to a false dichotomy, I think we all believe. But the point is, it sadly has become a very partisan issue that separates according to along party lines. I imagine this is an issue that faces you, and as you think about your membership and dealing with various stakeholder groups. What thoughts do you have on how to deal with that? Is there a way to, on the one hand, be open and have dialogue with people who, raise a very contrasting point of view, and at the same time, not be so willing to listen, if you will, that we don't also realize we're going to be strong against this current administration, which is undoing so many things that are going to, if they see their way, roll the clock back, right, on many things that are going to be bad for the climate in the name of economic development. So long statement around my question, but I'm hoping that gives you all some things to say that we might benefit as elders in our community to influence friends in a constructive manner.
Thanks. I'll respond to that question. So yeah, there is really very deep polarization around climate change in this country. I believe it isn't quite as deep and is maybe a little bit more temporary than it looks at this particular moment. It hasn't always been that way, and I think it won't always be that way. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One is that the impacts of climate change, flooding, drought, changes in the agricultural cycle are disproportionately affecting a lot of red states. And also a lot of the solutions. I mean, you look at where wind power is going in and all the jobs that go with that, and a lot of that is really surging in red states. And then Mike spoke before about the economics, and the economics are shifting. Renewable energy is becoming cost competitive. Investors are really starting to increasingly move their money away from the fossil fuel infrastructure and toward renewable energy. And that's, partly it's the divest invest movement, and universities are doing it, but even the big state pension funds are starting to make those moves. And so in the face of those very profound forces, climate denial won't be able to stand up to that for very long. And so I think we're beginning to see changes. I mean, climate denial we must say, it's very well funded. The fossil fuel industry is striving very hard to hang on to what it has, and there's a lot of money going to influence politicians to have certain positions. But eventually that won't stand up to these greater forces that we're seeing, and I think increasingly it's becoming politically untenable to be a climate denier. We have, a mobilization of lots of people that are speaking out, and so politicians will hear that. Politicians are hearing that, and so I think even now at the federal level, I've been hearing about there are a number of Republican representatives and senators who are quietly signaling that they don't want to be climate deniers. They do want to see action on climate, and so we need to keep that pressure up. And then at the local level, even more strongly, and one of the big things the Sierra Club is doing is working with cities to get them to commit to 100% renewable energy. And we're seeing Republican mayors joining Democratic mayors in making those commitments. And then also Republican governors like Charlie Baker there in Massachusetts have told the world that he's still in for delivering on their state's commitment to the Paris Agreement through the U.S. Climate Alliance. So I think locally we're seeing even more action. So I think that transition is happening. And then in terms of how do we bridge that divide, how do we keep that moving? One is to appeal to core shared values. People want clean air. They want clean water. They want their beloved local natural places. Those are really fundamental values that cross partisan lines. And I think as more people see those things threatened, they're going to stand up and react to those threats. And I think we're already seeing that happen. Also focusing on the economic benefits of the transition, the health benefits, the security benefits. There are many, many reasons to shift to clean energy, and we don't totally care what your reasons are as long as you're on board. So I think there are different angles that appeal to different audiences. And then another one is paying attention not just to the message, but who the messengers are. So there are plenty of people out there that are never going to listen to what Mike Brune or I have to say. Sorry, Mike. But no matter how articulately you say it, there are just folks that people listen to their trusted sources. And so some people, when they hear that we're with the Sierra Club, are automatically not going to listen to what we have to say. And so they need to hear some of those things from other sources. And I think that's why it's important that you guys, the listeners to this call, that you're also speaking to your communities, that others are speaking to their networks, because people listen to those they know, to those they trust, to be members of their communities. So you mentioned the role of elders, and I would say that's where I think a lot of that is very important. Elders often have a prominent role in their communities. They're trusted voices. And those are the voices that can bring about change. I mean, when you think about making major behavioral changes or cultural changes, it's important to remember that people are very tribal. We move in tribes, we move in groups. And so having those trusted voices to make those movements as part of a community, make those changes together, is very compelling. And there have been you think of the voices that have been speaking out so strongly on these issues. I mean, you think of the Pope's encyclical and what a huge difference. I mean, we saw a statistical change in the attitudes around climate change after this encyclical came out. And you think of tribal elders, you think of other religious leaders that have been increasingly speaking up on climate matters, and those are very trusted voices. And so I think elders are in a position to help amplify those messages. Another piece is leading by example. So there was an interesting study done about what would motivate people to make changes in their homes, to make their homes more energy efficient. And they tried different things. They tried telling people about the doom and gloom of climate change and how they needed to do their part. And they tried telling people about the economic benefits of making the changes. And then they another group of people, they talked to them about what their neighbors were doing. And by far, the most effective was hearing about what your neighbors were doing. And so I think for respected members of our community to take actions themselves, whether it's in their homes, their churches, the schools that they're associated with, and then be very public about those actions they're taking, that makes a big difference in bringing about change. I heard Bill McKibben's, I watched his interview with you guys, and he talked about elders being in a position where they can maybe take more risk than some others that are earlier in their careers. I think that makes sense. And also, people later in life often have more time that they can commit to some of these causes. They have established networks, they have certain skills to bring to bear. Sierra Club certainly has a lot of elders within our community that are dedicating a lot of their time. And so that's important. But I would say, lastly, that I think one of the very most important things the elders can do is to recruit, encourage, support, and empower the next generation of climate activists. I have 2 teenagers, and I've met a lot of younger people through my work with the Sierra Club. And they're really smart and creative, and they're really, really committed to this. They've grown up with climate change. There's very little denial among the next generation. And frankly, they're going to inherit this tremendous problem that our generation really helped create. And so we need to do everything we can to set them up for success and to start helping raise up their voices now, not later. And to give them every opportunity they can have to succeed. And so I think that's one of the most important things that the elders can do now.
That's great, thanks.
This is Steve Semmer from Northampton. I'm a psychotherapist, so my question is a different type of question. It's not so much about policy. Joanna Macy has written a lot about the high incidence of despair and rage and burnout among those who devote a lot of time and energy to social change, issues like climate change. And I'm curious about whether this type of thing haunts you, whether you have difficulties with this, whether you manage to dodge those bullets of despair or rage or burnout.
So I think I'll take this one too, if I may. So I read an interview with Joanna Macy from a few months ago. And one of the things she said is, we need an opposing wind to fly. It's the hardship that catalyzes our awakening. And I really believe that. I think of when I woke up last November 9th and like many others, felt a lot of despair in that moment, a lot of despair about many issues that I care deeply about. Climate among them, but also protecting our natural places, about equity, about justice, and about our democracy itself. But I did also feel hope that we would see a mobilization, a big mobilization and reaction. And we have been seeing that. I mean, you look at some of the new groups that have suddenly arisen since the election. You look at Indivisible. You look at some of the other groups, some of our partner organizations working on other issues like ACLU, Planned Parenthood, and the Sierra Club as well. We've seen this huge surge of people that treating this moment like a wake-up call. And so, we now have over 3 million members and supporters. We're seeing the fastest growth we're ever seeing in terms of people supporting the organization and people who really want to engage and work with us. And that's really powerful. So that's a mobilization that's about resistance to the current threats. But if we work with it correctly, that's also long-term power building. And I think that's going to serve us well in the long run. So I noted that this year in the Chinese calendar, this is the year of the rooster, which I find very apt. I think this is a year for us to wake up. And we see that continuing. I mean, there are new salts each day. And so we see that new awakening. So another one, was when Donald Trump declared his intention to pull out of the Paris Accord. U.S. cities, states, corporations, universities, leaders of all sorts stepped up and announced, we are still in. You may be exiting, but we're not going to. And so I think there's a whole new level of ownership for both this problem of climate change and the solutions. And so across the country, we're seeing local advocates that are helping keep fossil fuels in the ground by blocking new dirty fuel infrastructure and pipelines, retiring dirty coal plants in a historic and unprecedented fashion, and securing commitments by cities and states to power themselves with 100% renewable energy. And this is tremendous and it's powerful, which is not to say it's easy. I mean, that's all very hopeful, what I say. This isn't easy. It's a new assault every day. Sometimes I just have to, put down the paper, close the computer, because it's a one bombardment after another on everything we hold dear, everything I hold dear. So I would say there's steps we have to take to deal with that. We have to realize that this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. We're in this for the long run. This bombardment is going to continue. And so how do we cope with that? And how do we take care of ourselves in doing that? And for me, again, a big piece of it is communities. So we're working together in community. So not only is that more powerful, you'll get more done, but it's also supporting. I feel very supported by my fellow volunteers and by the staff at the Sierra Club. And that is part of what gets me through those moments of despair. And so at the Sierra Club and with other organizations, we're expanding who we work with. I mean, we realize to do this resistance, we need more people engaged. And so we're reaching out further, particularly to the people who are most directly affected by climate change. So we're bringing new people into our community to work with. And then in doing that, remembering within your communities to take time and have fun and pay attention to taking care of yourself, take breaks, preferably in nature. The Sierra Club is partnering has university partners that were documenting the healing power of nature. And it's a real thing. There's a lot of evidence of what a difference it makes. So the Sierra Club, as I mentioned before, somebody asked before we started recording about the Sierra Club's history. The Sierra Club this year is 125 years old. And from our very beginning, we were taking people out on hikes, and we still do all across the country. We take people out into nature paddling, hiking, what have you. And so I would invite all of you and all of the viewers to come join us for a hike. It'll make you feel better, I promise.
Mm-hmm. Great
you.
idea. Thank you very much.
You have time for one more question now, the last one? This is Lance again. Well, most of us are aware of the more common impacts of climate change, for instance, melting ice caps, rising waters, desertification, and severe weather. What are some of the less obvious consequences of altering climate? For example, Bill McKibben spoke of changes to our food supply system that will impact everything from the coffee we drink in the morning to the wine we sip at night. We'd like to hear your assessment of the subtle changes of global warming in our daily lives that may elude our awareness, and what can we elders do about it?
Oops. Am I on?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, or if I muted myself. I'll take this one. So yeah, look, I mean, I think it should be stated first that climate change will affect almost every life system on the entire planet. That sounds like a dramatic, almost reckless statement, but it's true because of how interconnected our environment is and how we are such a big part of the natural environment. It's the butterfly effect gone haywire. You know, we all know about the butterfly effect. You know, what happens if a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil? Does it create a tornado in Texas? Climate change is an accelerant to the kind of changes that we're seeing all around the country and all around the world. So I was just on vacation with family in New Jersey, and I was reading an advanced copy of Jeff Goodell's book. Jeff Goodell is a longtime writer, thinker about climate change. He writes for Rolling Stone magazine, among other places. And he has a book coming out in October called The Water Will Come. And so this is part of what you just cited, Lance. One of the known factors of climate change will be rising sea levels. But he goes into this in a level that I haven't seen anybody do before, which is to really think through, what does that mean for the town that I grew up in? He has a section on Toms River, New Jersey, Miami Beach, Norfolk, Virginia, communities in Nigeria and Lagos and South Asia, all around the world, and what the impacts will be simply from a perspective of economics and the dislocation that families and communities and large parts of entire countries will have. I live on an island in the San Francisco Bay. It's barely an island. It's called Alameda. It's right off of Oakland. And I can say that even in a very wealthy community like the San Francisco Bay Area with an enormous amount of resources, we are entirely unprepared for the effects of sea level rise, much less other effects on climate change. And if you look at communities that don't have the financial resources that we do here in California or across the United States, in countries where you have a majority of the population living below $2 a day, and you think about the challenges that we'll face, it's pretty profound. So yeah, we can go through a walk in the supermarket and identify one product after another: chocolate, the wine that we drink, the bread that we eat, the coffee, as Bill has written about, and we can talk about the impacts on our own diet, on our own families, on our own communities. But when we think about, from a climate perspective, the changing ecosystems and also the geopolitical consequences of climate change, it's pretty profound. So if we're to relate that to the previous question about despair and what do we do about all of this, I think that the role that we have as humans and the role that elders have is to be honest and direct, and honest about the impacts of climate change and the risks and the threats that we faced. We don't want to close our eyes. We don't want to avert our gaze. We don't want to stick our heads in the sand, particularly when the seas are rising. It's a dangerous thing to do. We don't want to scare people, but we want to be mindful about what is coming. And at the same time, we want to be honest about the opportunities that we have to affect change. We know that activism works, that principled disciplined, persistent public engagement can bring about lots of really positive things in the world on civil rights and human rights, on economic justice, on environmental issues. Our country has 2 centuries worth of examples of principled engagement bringing about more justice for more people. We know that that's true on climate change. We know that in town after town after town, we are already moving off of dirty fuels, moving towards clean energy, moving towards a more benign way of powering our society. And that is bringing a lot of more justice, economic and social, maybe even a little bit more racial justice at the same time. So I think that as human beings in the 21st century, we have to carry both things in our hearts and our minds, that we face unprecedented challenges as a species. And we also face unprecedented opportunities as a species to address these issues and to find ways to have both of those thoughts in our minds at all time, not to be disempowered by the scale of the challenge, but also to be excited even by what we can accomplish when we work together.
Thank you. Loren and Michael, we're so grateful to have 2 of the highest ranking officers of the most prestigious organizations spending this much time with us. We give you our commitment to disseminate this far and wide through the Mankind Project to everyone we know, and to share these words of wisdom and thoughts that you had with us.
Thanks so much.